Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and I'm going to tell you about the IPTN N-250. Now, you're probably saying, I've never heard of that aircraft, and that's not surprisingly unusual, and actually it's a very good thing that you've never heard of this aircraft, because this aircraft was quite a bit of a disaster, and this was one of the more interesting, let's put it that way, aircraft I reviewed as chairman of the ALPA National New Aircraft Evaluation and Certification Committee. There was a company in Indonesia, in Bandung, and they were going to produce this aircraft. And they brought in a lot of expertise from all over the world to design this, but it was not a very good design at all, and I'll go into that and tell you why. And of my 53 years of flying now, only once has my wife ever said, please don't test fly that airplane. And she's referring to the IPTN 250. Only once. Now, when I was going through college, I could not afford to fly. I couldn't really afford any sort of aviation except for skydiving. It was reasonably cheap enough, but there was no decent club close by, so I started the Iowa Parachute Team. I was the president and founder of this. In fact, my wife would come out to the drop zone and take care of the books and stuff, and she actually wrote the thank you notes from our wedding on the drop zone. So, well, I'm going to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. Okay, that's fine, dear. Well, the Air Force pays for me to get my pilot's license, and I get into a club, and I've got, 40 hours of flight time, and we get in this little Cessna 150. And shortly after I'd done a flight to get the radio repaired, the most experienced person in our club, well, actually the second most experienced, he had 600 hours, very experienced pilot, takes off in what ended up being bad weather, which he didn't realize, and it had a Venturi and didn't have the attitude indicator. I mean, he crashes and kills himself and destroys the airplane. No real comments from my wife. So I go through Air Force pilot training. I go out to Edwards. I'm involved in a flight test as a chase pilot out there. And, NASA invited me to come over and fly simulated shuttle approaches in the F-104 with their astronauts, X-15 test pilots and shuttle astronauts. We'll do 1-360 from 30,000 feet, come down at 12,000 feet per minute flare and land. I go, that sounds fine. No problems with that whatsoever. Of course, I get hired by the airlines. I get furloughed. I'm working for Cessna Flight Test, and we had a little problem with the hydraulic system, a poor flare, and I talk about this in another video. But ended up sliding a 404 on its nose to a stop at Wichita, and that's fine, no problem with that. My very last flight at Wichita before I went to a flight test at Boeing involved a fire on the 421 that burnt through the engine cowling. Well, fine. Didn't get a rise out of her. A friend of mine invited to fly the Breezy with him, and yes, this is what it looks like. Now, this wasn't the Breezy that we flew. I don't have a actual picture of it. You know, phones weren't as ubiquitous back then, so I don't have a whole bunch of good stream of pictures. So this is just a file one. But they're a little more safety conscious than we were. We didn't have helmets even. But the guy who owned it sold it. A guy restored it, and unfortunately, on his first test flight, he didn't realize that he had wired the ailerons backwards. So he had reverse control, didn't do, obviously, an adequate flight control check before he took off, and, with the reverse controls, he ended up crashing and killing himself. Well, okay, that's fine. My wife always considered me a good pilot, so she didn't worry. Later on, I said, hey, NASA invited me to come out and do a flight test on the F-18 with him. I'm going to fly with Gordon Fullerton, a 2-time shuttle astronaut, and okay, that's fine, no problem with that. But when it came to the IPTN 250, she says to me, I'd really prefer that you don't fly that aircraft. And, you may look at this and go, well, that looks like a fairly, conventional looking turboprop. It started out with a 50-seater, and they decided they needed 68 to 70 seats. But see, here's the deal, and this was the crux of the whole matter, and this is what got me into trouble. See, my wife has always proofread all my reports, articles, and stuff like this because I can spell so poorly that spell checker just goes, I have no idea what you're trying to spell there. It can't even figure it out. This was before I could ask Amelia how to spell stuff. And that works quite well, or spell checker so I could get close enough. But okay, she normally did not really read my reports. She checked them for, is everything spelled properly? Does the sentence structure make sense? She's really good at that. But this one, I think she happened to read in a little more closer detail, and she's looking at this and going, I'm not quite so happy about this. And that's where, and I'll go into the details here of why she wasn't as happy on me flying this. All right, so the Indonesian company, IPTN, they had offices in Seattle, and that's where we had a number of meetings with them, and they gave me a lot of material, of course. We've got the standard, this is the technical description, very detailed, and of course, then we've got all the promotional stuff here talking about how great of an airplane this is going to be for everybody, and stuff like this. I have more of this stuff than I know what to do with. This is why I have all these boxes full of paperwork over here that my kids are going to have to get rid of. And then the other thing is, of course, I have enough hats to last me forever. Here's my IPTN N-250 hat. I am set for life. And coffee cups. Okay, here is the IPTN coffee cup. You can't see it very well. That's gold on there. There, I think you can see it a little bit better there. But I got coffee cups coming out of the wazoo and that. And anyway, lots of bling there. But bling doesn't make a good aircraft. Okay, they had a representative. He was a U.S. guy. All the rest were Indonesians, but he was a U.S. guy who had commuter experience, and he was our host. So, okay, I'm in Jakarta, so we're going to go out to Bandung to take a look at this airplane. So, we get nice business class seats. That was good. He was a very good host. So we go out of Chicago, we go to Los Angeles. Then we catch a Garuda, that was their airline flight, Garuda to Honolulu, and then out of there we take a Garuda flight to Bali, and that was interesting. It took, it's on the ground, I counted 10 people servicing the engine with oil. I guess everybody gets a job there. And we just had, of course, a short stay in Bali. That's a real nice, resort people. I saw the airport like a lot of really nice places. I've got, I think, 4.5 hours. I'm digressing. I got 4.5 hours in Cancun, and it's all at the airport. 45-minute segments there, and same thing with other nice locations that I haven't experienced too much, unless once I got international, we had nice layovers in Sydney's and stuff like that. So out of Bali, then we go over to Jakarta, which is the capital, and that's the main location. And our ultimate trip is down to Bandung. Well, this whole process, and I'm talking to one of my representatives back home, a guy who's on my committee, who Jack Jarvis, who was the turboprop expert, and he said, I've been talking to you now for going on 3 days when you've been making this trip, because with all the connections and stuff, it took a while, but there were no hotels until we got to Jakarta. And this is our Marriott hotel, and you're going, boy, that really looks run down. Well, this wasn't, fortunately, when we were there. One of the things that happened in Indonesia was they had a bit of financial difficulties and unrest. And somebody set a bomb off, and I'll show you about the shopping center later. But somebody set a bomb off in the out in front of the Marriott in Jakarta, and it was good that the timing, was different. Like, I wasn't there, and our group wasn't there, because they had a nice buffet that I used to enjoy in the morning. We spent a day or so in Jakarta just trying to get a little bit rested up before we went on down to Bandung. Now, this is one of IPTN's earlier aircraft, a N-235. They use this a lot for military, but it also was used in commercial activities. Now, I think they used what we call the Russian center of gravity load planning criteria, which is if it fits, it flies. Because our host says, normally we had been flying everywhere, and this was, an example of the aircraft. And he says, no, we'll take the train. So we ended up taking the train down to Jakarta, which was kind of interesting because he did not have enough faith in either their aircraft or the operation to want to risk flying on it, which should have been a little bit of precursor of what was going on. Okay, well, the N-250 was their entry into the more advanced turboprop market. And of course, they were competing with like the Dash 8, Dash 400, the Saab 2000, and aircraft of that ilk. And generally, they had a fairly nice, layout of the aircraft. And when you put it together in a mock-up like this, it looks pretty good, looks pretty nice. 6 CRTs across there. But it's amazing the difference between doing it right and doing it close and all the issues you can have. And of course, the reality is not quite as good as all the pictures they give you. But now here's the report that got me in trouble with my wife and saying, I really don't want you to fly this. We had several meetings and we went over to Jakarta to, like I said, Bandung, to fly the aircraft. And one of the things is we had a very significant review of the aircraft, the systems, basically a paper review. And we made a bunch of recommendations. And the thing that's interesting is that they adopted, between us and some of the operators, they adopted virtually every single one of our recommendations. I mean, this aircraft had a lot of problems, and I'll get into it. It's really interesting to see how somebody can really screw up a design, even though they tried to bring in a lot of outside help. This design just really was lacking. They actually, and on the letter it talks about they appreciated our, involvement, but they actually were delaying the implementation of the final design, and we're making all these changes because of our input. The first flight was in August, 10 August of 1995. Our visit was in 96, and they were planning for a flight evaluation. Our visit was in early April of 96, and they were actually planning a flight evaluation for us in September of 96. But that never came about because of the economic things and stuff like that. Now, one of the things I think that got my wife's attention was now this was a fly-by-wire aircraft, but we didn't even get that far into it because it had so many other issues. But they were using FADEX, full authority digital engine control systems, but they had a little issue with that. With the failure of one engine, the control of the propeller of the other engine is lost. And it was a software problem. So basically, if you lost one engine, you'd get an uncontrollable overspeed in the other. That was attributed to design issues with the Ellison engines. That's what they were using. And the FAA, which was kind of monitoring this, they must have been monitoring it from afar, but they basically said that, obviously this is not acceptable. The original aircraft had a lot of deficiencies as far as this class of aircraft. Now they were trying to compete with the 70-seat aircraft class, so they decided, well, we're going to have to put more seats on this. And initially, they had virtually no capacity to take baggage. I don't know if it's more common in their country not to take clothes where you go places, but finally we got them to put, to have 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of weight carrying capability for mail cargo and stuff like that. and they were looking at least an 800 nautical mile range, and 1,000 is preferred. And we were telling them, you need some improved aircraft performance, because the aircraft performance is really kind of bad. But now, here's another thing that you'll find interesting. Initially, the auxiliary power unit was going to be required to be operational for all flights, because you would not be able to start the engines. If you had an engine failure, you would not be able to start the engines without the APU being operational. Well, we convinced him that wasn't a good idea, and there were also issues with the hydraulic system. The hydraulic system and flight control integration was a disaster, and they finally decided, okay, we're going to change that system. We're going to use an electric start system for the engines, and we're going to use DC hydraulic pump for flight control backup, because essentially there was virtually a non-existent center system to operate as any flight control backup. But essentially, you could lose an engine and lose the hydraulic system because of it. And in certain situations, you would only have one aileron that gave you any sort of roll control. And they were also, we convinced them to put a cargo area in the front of the aircraft and increase the engine power to 4,000 shaft horsepower, which was kind of the normal amount of horsepower you would have on this class of aircraft. It was just generally underpowered. And of course, this also involved a gross weight increase. And the airliners wanted 2 passenger doors, and this is also, important for evacuation. One in the front, which they had, but they also wanted one in the back, and they were studying that door design. There was also an issue with the CRT configuration, and they're going to use CRTs instead of LCD displays. And we said, LCD is the upcoming technology, and you guys should really adopt that instead of the CRTs. But there was an issue that because of the way information was displayed, if the center CRT was not operational, you could not dispatch it. And even private pilots who don't know as much about airline flying as any airline pilots looking at this will be interested in that. They had one green gear indication, just one gear indication. You got green. So if one of the 3 gears didn't come down, you got a red. Well, which gear didn't come down? You can't see the gear very well from the cockpit, especially the nose gear, obviously. So it was kind of like, which gear didn't come down? So we said, you need a green light. Okay, this is the sort of thing we were dealing with. You need a green light to indicate that each gear is down and locked. And we had talked about, it'd be nice to go above 25,000 feet, but the users didn't really feel the need for that, so that was not adopted. That was one of the few things that we suggested that was not adopted. Other things were like, you need a larger set of overhead bins. The overhead bins were virtually non-existent, so they increased the size 50 to 60%. They're pretty much like 2.9 cubic feet per passenger, so they're pretty close to the A320s. They had a RAT on it, ram air turbine, to back up the center hydraulic system in case you had dual hydraulic failure. But the only problem with that, and they never resolved this, was that the RAT could not provide sufficient power to operate the systems on either takeoff or landing. Takeoff wouldn't be an issue, but landing is where you want it. And you don't want the thing to stall out with no other backup here, especially since with the design you have the center system going to the rudder and the right hydraulic system going to the rudder. So if you lose the right hydraulic system and the RAT stalls out on you and you're coming in single engine, you have no rudder control. Not a good idea. And one of the things they did as a result of this, they put in manual control of the flight controls. Okay, so that's a lot better. And the interesting thing is Jack Jarvis, my guy who was involved in, he's my commuter airline guy. He made the comment that we were walking over to see the airplane. He made the comment. He says, "Well, with the manual backup and they had tested it." at this time. He said, "Is that sufficient? I mean, can women pilot handle the rudder in manual backup?" And I said, look at the chief test pilot there. He was a French test pilot. I said, he's smaller than almost all of the women we have in the United States. I mean, if this guy weighed 80 pounds, soaking wet, it would be, I would be surprised. Little guy, I said, if he can fly it, I don't think we got a problem with any of, women flying it. And Jet kind of laughed and says, yeah, I see your point. Another thing, yeah, this has to do with the ATR issue, with the icing and stuff like that, the flowback problem. One thing that they did correctly was they had bigger boots. The boots went farther back than they did on the ATR, so it can cover more area of the leading edge. And the other thing is, and this got into the 60-pound snatching thing on the ATR, was that they used hydraulically powered ailerons, so you're not going to have that issue. They were also studying the use of a hot wing. And so far, the flight test program had 208 hours, and 29 of it had been spent on flutter testing. So they had cleared that part of the envelope. And they expected to have a second aircraft flying by June of '96, and they did build that aircraft. They ended up only building 2 of these. The program was canceled. They built 2 of them, and they were going to build a third one, but that aircraft was never built. Another little thing issue here is the interior noise level was high. They were using, at turboprops, you can get pretty good noise, and they were having a noise level. The design was of 76 dB, and the original design level was 78. Now 3 dB isn't a doubling of the power, so that 2 dB is a lot more significant than it may sound like. Now, some more items we addressed. The schematic display of the electrical panel on the overhead panel where you had control of it was really not easy to follow, and it was almost kind of deceptive. So he said, you guys need to clean that up, and they agreed to do that, and we gave them some ideas on that. They only had 1 DME provider. We said, you really need 2. This is the year before GPS was really coming of its own, and we said GPS should at least be provided as an option. They said, hey, we'll do 2 DMEs, and we will provide GPS as an option. We'll make GPS ready. The radar control head is way back here. Very kind of difficult to operate, even for the captain, and especially for the first officer. Interesting thing was they had a rudder trim switch, and you could place a flight manual, book, anything on that, and actually activate the rudder trim. So I go, no, that's really bad. You need to provide a method of guarding that, so you don't have that. Parking brake handle was next to captain knee, very hard to operate. And you'll love this one. They need to have a method of silencing the fire warning system. If the fire warning system goes on in their present design, there's no way to silence it. That thing's just going to keep on going. I guess if the fire goes out, but there's a lot of times where you get extended fire warning because it takes a while for the system to cool down, and it can be several minutes and stuff like that. You don't want that darn bell to be going off that entire time. Propeller feather control should be up on the overhead panel where it's more easy to operate. Oh, and crew baggage. There was essentially no place to store a crew bag in the cockpit. Now, this, unfortunately, for this class of aircraft is not unusual, but we said, you need a secure location. Their design was way in the back part of the aircraft, so you can imagine what a fiasco that is, trying to get your stuff out. And the other thing is, we said it needs to be secured, because I know of commuter pilots who have had laptops stolen and their bags stolen and stuff like that. The passengers are getting off the airplane, they're still in the cockpit, and somebody knows that he put his bag in there, and that bag can disappear. So that's not a good system. And like we talked about, there needs to be more mechanical backup signaling systems for the systems where you can actually mechanically signal the hydraulic actuator, or in some cases, especially like the rudder, you can actually mechanically control it directly. And they were going to completely redesign the rudder system with the manual backup capability for all three of the axes. Also, because they were kind of new at the whole fly-by-wire thing, we said, you need just a cutoff switch on that, an override, so you can dump the fly-by-wire flight control system, like on the 777, where it's just one red guarded switch. And they said, yeah, we'll put a switch on the rear control panel, circuit breaker panel. We go, no. It needs to be more accessible. They said, well, we're worried that the crew may experiment with turning off the flight control system just to see how it flies. And I go, well, there's an easy way to get around that. You safety wire it. So if the safety wire is broken, you can come and talk to whoever did that. There was no way to activate the ground spoilers other than automatically, and we said, you need a mechanical handle so that once they're on the ground, if the pilots want the ground spoilers, they can get them in case there is a malfunction, because that's not an unheard of problem. And the rudder system will also have backup DC pumps in addition to the manual backup. We also said that the APU should auto start in flight for any single or dual engine failure. They were a little bit hesitant on that, but we said, since they had the batteries, but they said no, it's not uncommon for the system to be designed that if you have a dual engine failure, that you get the APU online as a backup system. Also, the cargo compartment needs to be heated in case anybody is carrying small animals. And there was an issue on the cabin door, the way the steps were kind of integrated, that we thought it would be very easy for a flight attendant to injure themselves the way certain aspects of that step stuck out in the door. Oh, and another fun thing is, and I'll show you this on the overhead panel, but the emergency depressurization button needs to be guarded. You could be reaching your hand up there to activate something and inadvertently press that, and if you're cruising along at 25,000 feet and you hit the wrong button and depressurize the cabin, that is not going to be a good thing. All right, so here's the basic layout of the aircraft. It looks like any twin-engine turboprop of this class. And if you want to look at this in more detail, this is the basic passenger configuration and dimensions of the aircraft. This is what it would look like if you decided not to put any outer skin on the aircraft. And the various performance information here. And again, getting into the flight control systems, and I'll talk about this in just a second, they needed a lot more work. And there's the power plant with the six-bladed prop there. And there's another picture of it. As propeller goes, very beautiful. The basic interior cabin design. And there's some more pictures. They're comparing it to larger aircraft that have small seating arrangements, if you will. And there's a picture of the APU in the tail end, and there's the ram air turbine that's been deployed. And again, the basic outlay. So we get into the technical description here with the various parameters for the aircraft that you can look at if you're interested in. And of course, I talked about the ability to start the engines if you have a in-flight engine failure, and a dual engine flame out. You need a way to restart those. And also they needed a way to supply the center hydraulic system in case you had an engine problem. And that had not been developed at the time. Now this is the new and improved system, but for most of you familiar with this type of design, you'll notice there still is not a horrendous amount of backup here. Two systems two hydraulic systems going to the rudder, which would be a extremely flight critical component if you have a engine failure, because big propellers like that, they need a lot of you need a lot of rudder to control it, and they really should have three systems. Oh, and here is a fun little aspect. The depressurization switch here, emergency depressurization switch, was not guarded. So if you were moving your fingers around there, you could possibly inadvertently press that switch. And of course, if you're cruising up near 25,000 feet, that's not going to be a good thing. And there's the in-flight engine restart. The ability to windmill restart the engines, of course, is reasonably limited. You got to really be going quickly. And here's the engine control system with the FADEC. Yes, it gets a little complicated. And the layout generally wasn't too bad. We had a lot of recommendations. Things were just not convenient, and they could do a lot better positioning of various components on the forward and center console. And then the overhead and the power distribution system wasn't too bad, but the display on the overhead panel is just not very intuitive. And here is, of course, that's a picture. I'll give you a better picture of the, I gave you a better picture of the hydraulic system there. And also the various systems here with the spoiler controls. And at the time, they did not have any manual backup for this. It was all hydraulic. And we said, you really should have something more than just fully hydraulic back control of these systems without any way of manually backing it up in case you had a fly-by-wire system problem or a hydraulic problem. And there we have the aileron and elevator control and the rudder system. Now, like I said, they had one of these flying, and the whole program shortly after we were there came to a halt, and nothing more was accomplished. And it's probably good. I mean, they were making a lot of improvements on this, and over the years they tried to resurrect this thing, and it was never successful. Finally, in 2000, they shut the whole program down. But there's a picture of one of the N-250s in flight test. You can see the boom there on the right for airspeed, typical flight test aircraft. And there's the two aircraft outside of the factory there in Bandung. And Indonesia is definitely a third world country. There's no other way to get it to say it other than that. When you're out, you see a guy riding with a bunch of dead chickens hung over the handlebars, taking him to a restaurant. But like I said, there was unrest. This is a shopping center that we had frequented at the time, and it was burnt down due to terrorist activity, basically. And the thing about it is, I'm glad we weren't there, because one thing I noticed, by U.S. standards, the ability to escape that place in a fire would just be disastrous. The stairways and that were very small, and if you had a problem in that place and you had to get out of it, you could very well be in trouble. So in the end, one of the N-250s was moved and placed in a aviation museum in Jakarta, I believe, and that's where it remains. The program never got off the ground. Probably good. It had a lot of deficiencies. They were working on correcting them, but I never had a good feeling about this aircraft. And like I said, it's the only one where my wife says, I would appreciate it if you didn't fly that. And I think she had a very good point. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting from the aspect of a system aircraft you probably never heard about, and the good reasons why, and how even somebody that brings in outside vendors can try to put together an aircraft, but bringing everybody together and making it work doesn't always work. And in this case, it certainly did not. So thanks for watching. I hope you found it enjoyable and informative. Thank you.